It was a safe place. It was just like, three block square, 4 block square. And I was safe.
People actually looked out for each other. People actually cared for each other.
It was just a community of love.
I mean, you couldn't drive down Division and not see a club, because it was clubs up, and that's why it was considered a party town.
On Indiana Street, from Lancaster all the way down to Sanford, it would be people going to the joints.
Where, you had Johnny Paley was there, B.B. King.
Of course, there was 2 or 3 gambling shacks. And gambling wasn't held in much disdain as it is, with people now. It was nothing. It was just that's what you did.
Fort Worth was the Bible Belt, and it was the Norris First Baptist Church. He kind of controlled Fort Worth and held these people down. They could go to Arlington and have fun, and that's what they did.
Lou Henry Taylor and her sister, Lou Tom, were so influential.
Lou Henry was a smart businesswoman. She ran a grocery store and a beer joint and a club. Any of the churches that were in the neighborhood knew they could go in and get bread or ice or whatever they needed from Lou Henry, and she didn't charge them.
She supported school programs. She supported churches. She would help get people out of trouble. She'd loan you money.
She had a lot of contacts, and I think the chief of police always took care of her.
When people got sick, she would be the first one there. And it didn't matter if they were black, brown, or white. She fed them, she bought them clothes.
Even though there was trouble here now, you can't have a club without trouble. They made that place what it is today.
Lou Henry was way ahead of her time.
North Texas was a hotbed of tension because there was a lot of concern that slavery wasn't accepted by everyone. And many of the leaders felt that traveling itinerant Methodist ministers were coming in and stirring up ferment among slaves and others. Many of the former slaves began forming their own communities. And even in places like Northeast Texas, in Dallas, there were freedom colonies. And these were towns, communities formed by free blacks.
Now, if you read some of the scholarship of the time, you'll find there's a mass violence against African Americans, where they show some former slave owners just wantonly kill African Americans. In fact, they killed about 1% of the male population.
White Texans believed that blacks were not civilized, were subhuman. We're going to put them in jail whenever we can. It becomes another form of racial control.
One of the main concerns is policing and controlling this large mass of enslaved people in the South. They developed these elaborate police systems in the South to control this large enslaved population.
And so what happens for African Americans is the slow but gradual evolution into what we call Jim Crow segregation. We hear about random, senseless, unprovoked even, acts of violence. One of those stories is that of Fannie Wilson, who was the daughter of Jack Ditto. Jack Ditto, who was a Baptist minister, was off preaching, and terrorists, white night riders, we might say, came up and began inquiring about him. The daughter, Fannie, who was 15 years old at the time, says that she remembers them calling out for her dad, her mother saying, well, he's not here. And they began shooting. And the mother was carrying a baby in her arms. And one of those blasts killed the child and left a wound on the mother both psychologically and physically, for the rest of her life.
Booker T. Washington went from the 1st grade to the 8th. And at one time, it only went from the 1st to the 6th grade.
Education was key in the black community at the time I was growing up. Many of us went to school knowing something about reading. We knew the alphabet, so by the time we got to 1st grade, we were ready to hit the ground running in terms of education. Plus, when you got there, you had teachers who were so invested in you that they made sure that you were going to learn, because if you failed, it meant they failed.
When you're being taught by a certain race for a certain period of time, there's a bond and something that happens there that you can't escape from.
What they did when they integrated the schools, and they decided to integrate the faculty, and what they did was they took the most accomplished black and experienced black teachers and put them in predominantly white schools. They took the most inexperienced and least accomplished white teachers and put them in the predominantly black schools.
I was in the 7th grade when schools integrated across the board. And I went to Nichols Junior High after having gone to Booker T. Washington from grades 1 through 6. It was tremendous. There was some white teachers just didn't want you there. You know, this was their job and they had to do it, but you really weren't welcome. And they would look for opportunities to fulfill that stereotype of what they already had about black students. And they discouraged many of them, and they dropped out. There were 3 churches, 3 different denominations. As a small kid, I was COGA, I was Church of God in Christ. We were Pentecost. Mount Olive was considered like the church, the community church.
When you joined church, you were taught God first, then family, and then community.
You couldn't go down there on Sunday, without almost the whole community being at church, one church or the other.
It's where they actually set a foundation for how they wanted to live. They built their life around that church.
Their church and their families are where they got their strength from.
You somewhere where somebody appreciate you, somebody love you.
We all worked together, and everybody was supportive of everybody. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but you had just so many people that really, really cared about each other, and they believed in helping each other, and it was just there.
White people call it town. We call it LA, Little Arlington, the Hill, the ghetto. But if I was within the confines of my community, I was safe. Everybody I saw cared about me.